Thank
Hello.
you, Rita. So today we are going to talk about how to handle breach disclosures. So the way we structured this presentation is in part one, I wanted to have a brief discussion around what kind of things which are publicly available and what could get reported by security researchers or white hat hackers to you. So that's first part. And second part is what is this vulnerability disclosure program? What are the standards and frameworks? What are some of the guidelines in terms of building a program? And also showing you some examples of what certain other organizations are doing. How is their public documentation in terms of their vulnerability disclosure program works, and some of the best practices in terms of how to make it effective and how to make it work. So that's the broad context. So let's jump into part one. So what kind of information is publicly available and what kind of information are security breach related data or vulnerabilities that could get shared with an organization? So I will share some of our experiences in terms of last 1 year or so. We had been conducting an experiment in terms of indexing the entire global internet, which includes the surface web, dark web, as well as the deep web. And based on such data, I will quickly present you in very short some of the interesting statistics which are there that will give you an idea of what is visible to white hat as well as black hat hackers or researchers across the globe. And these are the things which can be publicly available. And so if you have a vulnerability disclosure program, or even if you don't, security researchers sometimes, if they want to help you, they might just reach out to you and disclose such vulnerabilities and exposures. And it's a good idea that we create an encouraging atmosphere, an encouraging platform which makes such researchers to come and share these details with you in confidence, so that you can fix them before the bad guys get access to. So quickly about like what kind of interesting data which we found from our last 1 year experiment. I'm initially, first few slides are more around data related to India, considering this webinar is specifically for the India audience. But there is a mix of both global and Indian exposure as well. So like, for example, one of the most common database exposure which we find, and by database exposure, what we mean is a database without any password or some default passwords, which makes it very easily accessible or misconfigured. So basically hackers can access it very easily. So we have found somewhere around 5,000 such open database in India and some 500,000 across the globe. And a lot of times this discloses a lot of critical and confidential information. Like, for example, we have seen e-commerce companies, customer phone numbers and the details of the transactions being exposed by SMS gateways. We have seen startups exposing data, customer transaction data related to banks. We have seen a lot of such cases of various kinds in terms of database exposure, and the numbers are pretty huge. You can also see the breakup of the type of database which we see in terms of Mongo being the #1, Elasticsearch next. Then comes, for example, code leaks. A lot of times employees within the organization may put up some code in order to appear in an interview, and they may not always be aware of the aspects of whether that's right or legal or not. Sometimes it could be just pure misconfiguration. So a lot of code leaks happen, and these code leaks can happen both in the surface web as well as in the deep and dark web. We also see a lot of exposed and open DevOps tools. Like we see very commonly a lot of these, for example, Jenkins servers where it either has no password or some misconfiguration issues. So basically you can access that and you can push code into the production for such organizations, and these are openly available. Sometimes all this information which I mentioned can also be seen in Shodan. Then a lot of times we see these open cloud resources where you have these Amazon S3 buckets or some other cloud buckets which are exposing data related to customers or critical information which should not be public. And if you look at such kind of cases which we have noticed, and we also have these numbers, like we have seen more than 10,000 plus EBS snapshots, 400 plus RDS snapshots, etc. In fact, even for Amazon, there was an exposure which Amazon publicly acknowledged just before Black Friday. And there had been a lot of exposures, for example, related to Microsoft or Uber, where they had a subdomain which could be hijacked. So many of these actually got reported through a security researcher who reported to the company first. Like, for example, they reported it to Microsoft and they coordinated with Microsoft so that Microsoft fixes it first. And once they fix it, then it gets publicly divulged. And that's a great way. Imagine if it happened the other way. A hacker with malicious intent actually got access to that. It could have been very costly for Microsoft. Whereas because Microsoft has a good process to coordinate with researchers, these recent vulnerabilities or exposures could actually be detected and mitigated without causing any havoc on their business. Then we also have seen a lot of these exposed network services. We see like 30% of the large organization have some exposure in terms of LDAP, RDP, etc. 80% or even more of the organizations, large organizations, always have some UAT servers exposed or have some telnet, FTP, etc., etc. We have seen very commonly open vulnerable routers, and especially with a few specific brands which I don't want to name in public. So all these things are absolutely easily visible to researchers, white hat hackers, as well as black hat hackers across the internet. We also see a lot of times these open ICS, IoT devices, etc. So and outside of these exposures which are visible, we also, this is from our experience, like for example, our team had discovered vulnerability in Microsoft BitLocker, McAfee SafeBoot, Intel HP Lenovo's BIOS security, AVG, Sophos, etc. In each of these cases, we first went ahead and revealed these details to the company. We provided them the details, worked with them in terms of providing necessary information which can help them to fix it. And only once they fixed it, we made this public. And these are now part of CVE, which part of National Vulnerability Database maintained by NIST. So these are the kind of things which researchers could find out, and it's a good thing if the researchers come and share those details with you and you work in a coordinated manner with them so that it doesn't fall into the hands of bad guys or nation state actors. And as you all know today, cyber warfare is a reality. Nation state actors trying to hack into adversary countries is a reality. So you don't want these things to be used by such actors or malwares and all these things and become a victim of that. Rather, it's a better thing that researchers come and explain you this, share these details with you, and you fix them. So with that goal in mind, how do we handle such a breach disclosure? What are some best practices? What are some learning? And I'll share with you some of this learning based on being on both the sides. Mostly in most part of my 2 decades in the security field, I had been on the other side in terms of uh, disclosing such vulnerabilities to organizations, but I also had been as a part of advisory members or board members to various companies where such vulnerabilities were also disclosed to us. I have experience on both the sides, and I have seen the good, bad, ugly, and I'll share some of those learning from my personal experience, as well as some of the learning which is now available in terms of standard format, in terms of frameworks, etc. So I'll go through those in next part. So what is a vulnerability disclosure policy? So it's basically a set of guidelines or defined process for submitting potentially unknown vulnerabilities to an organization. And as a part of this, there are a few key components of a vulnerability disclosure program. And I have taken some of these components from some of these frameworks, which I'll share in the next slide. So one part is the brand promise. And what do I mean by brand promise? So when you have a vulnerability disclosure policy online, it's a good idea to share that as a brand or as an organization, you take security seriously for your customers, and you encourage or provide a platform for researchers to come and share such security risks with you so that you can mitigate them. And highlighting this promise that you take this seriously and you are committed towards taking care of your customer security and stuff like that is a part of the brand promise. And I'll show you some of the examples of what companies do over here. How do they write that? Then what is the part of the program? What is the program and what is the scope? Like, for example, you may want to include a certain set of products which you have as a part of the scope. You may want to even exclude some things as a part of scope for some reasons. So what is the part of scope? Putting that up on your public disclosure policy, and the assurance to the ethical hackers or the white hat hackers that if they do such research legally and if they share those vulnerabilities in a responsible manner in good faith, you will make sure that legally they are protected. Giving that assurance is very, very important, because the hackers have a lot of choices. One choice is just not tell you anything, because if they fear that there could be an issue while working with you and giving the details, they might just decide not to do it. Or they may decide that they will secretly go and post it somewhere else, or share it in the dark web, or send this information to some news or media and things like that. So they can take several actions which are detrimental for you, or take no action, which could also be detrimental, because then other hackers could just simply use that. So providing that assurance is very important. And then creating a process and a mechanism to communicate with you, your organization, in terms of reporting the breach and how that shall be handled, etc. And what are some of the preferences and prioritizations you have in terms of what should be part of scope, etc., and things like that. So these are the few components. So ISO 29147 2014, this provides certain this standard provides certain information on how you create a vulnerability disclosure program. So what should vendors do, what they shouldn't do, how it should work, etc. So you can use this link, go there and get the details of this. And and I can show you some of these while we talk about this. So this is the standard. You can download all the details. Then there are certain other guidelines which are also now part of US Department of Defense, Food and Drug Administration, FTC, NIST, etc. So these are all clickable links. We'll share this presentation after the webinar is over. So you can just simply click on this, go there and find out what are these guidelines saying. But broadly, what I mentioned is what is there, and there are some examples and details which I'm going to talk about later, which kind of takes the knowledge from all of this together to make things easy for you. And here are a few sample vulnerability disclosure programs. And I wanted to highlight three such companies programs: Salesforce, Cloudflare, and Amazon. And again, we have given the links, but I will take you through some of these. Let's look at Salesforce first. So if you just look at the first part, which is the policy, if you look at the first three paragraphs, the first section, this is about the brand promise. And this is what I was talking about, those key 5 components, which are part of some of these frameworks. So talking about that brand promise. Next is testing for security vulnerabilities. What's the scope? So they're suggesting always use test or demo accounts when testing our online services. So what they're saying is that we are making it easy for testers and security researchers who are interested in finding vulnerabilities. They also have a big contributors thank you, is creating a sense of confidence that they are encouraging the researchers to come and disclose vulnerabilities. And this is considered something as quite mature when it comes to even Salesforce customers. You know, Salesforce went through certain breaches, etc. They have to build a lot of confidence. But when you have a mature program like this, any mature customer will recognize your attempts of being open to information and fixing them fast. So they also provide these details that how do you report potential security vulnerabilities, which is the email address they have. Then Salesforce also says that we do not permit the following types of security research, which involves, for example, accessing their data, destroying or corrupting something, conducting social engineering on their people. These are not something which they allow. So here they are clearly stating what they don't want researchers to do. And next, they have the Salesforce security team's commitment. They're saying that we will respond in timely manner. We will provide an estimated time frame for addressing the vulnerability, notify when the vulnerability is fixed. And they are also creating this environment where they're saying that we are happy to thank every individual researchers, etc. So so this is one example of how you can build a responsible disclosure page on your website or a policy. Similarly, we have this for Cloudflare. Again, it starts with that trust, building that brand promise, which I mentioned, then what's within scope, then the process, what is eligible and what is not eligible. Again, if you look at this, again, the same structure, they're saying this kind of things we don't allow, like for example, physical attacks, social engineering, etc., etc. If you look at AWS, again, this looks slightly different, but at a high level, those 5 components which I mentioned is part of the program of almost any of the mature organizations who have vulnerability disclosure program. And then there is also a few more documents which you can look into. One is part of NTIA safety working group. There is a document on how to build a program, and also a sample for Acme Corp. And also SART has a guideline, which is a very long one. I'll show you both of them. Anyway, the links are there. You can go yourself. So this is for NTIA safety working group, and they also give an example over here, template disclosure policy, where they have this and they talk about this brand promise, etc. And if you look here, here's a sample vulnerability disclosure policy document. So you can take this template, customize it, change it for your organization so that it makes sense, and create your own. Similarly, SART has one, which is a very heavyweight, 120 pages. If you like this, you can go through the details. I will skip this. So we spoke about what is the structure of vulnerability disclosure policy. We also went through a few samples or examples. We also went through a few of these publicly available frameworks and standards. We also have a few frameworks where there are these examples and sample templates which you can go back and use. So these are some of the things which we did. And of course, in part one, we discussed about what all things we can find publicly, which could be related to your security vulnerability or your security breach risk. So now let's talk about building a program. And building a program is about having that system and process and structure so that it works every time in the same way, so that it is something which is not just working one or two times, but it should work like a machine. So for building a program, there are a few things which you need to do. One is definitely building this vulnerability disclosure page, which is easy to access. It shouldn't be very difficult to find. So it should be easy to access. Second is building an effective communications team and process. And this is very important. I mean, you need a communication team who receives such information, responds to it on time, works with your team in the backend to get it fixed, inform the researcher, and handle this entire thing end to end. And having that right team or right person is very important. Initially, you may assign one person who might do it as a part-time role, but for very large organizations, we know that they actually have multiple people just dedicated to do this. The third thing is you need to create a playbook or a process for in terms of how this shall be handled. What is the response template? Do you, I mean, you may just say thank you to the researcher, you may offer something more, you may give free t-shirts, you may create a hall of fame. How do you do this? And suppose the researcher also wants to disclose it to public, you make an announcement. How would you play a role in that? How do you control that communication? How do you make sure that that is projected in the right way and in the right light? How do you ensure that your customers are aware of it before it goes to the press? Or how do you coordinate in the right manner? So putting together this entire process is very, very important. And having playbooks. The other thing, a lot of organizations also go and declare a bounty in various bug bounty platform. Now, this is something which you may or may not do. Now, for example, if you haven't done penetration testing, if you don't do penetration testing during every release, it's fairly a bad idea to go and declare a bug bounty program. You rather first go and invest and do things which where you have the basics right. If you don't have the basics right, if you don't have the processes right, then it's not a good idea to do bug bounty. So once you do that, then I believe it's a good idea to also open it up to the larger hackers world, where they can also be part of your extended team to help you to make your product or make your platform or whatever you have online or offline, make it more secure. And outside of this program, it's very important that you should be very, very proactive. You should know your attack surface. You should monitor your attack surface so that you should not rely on hackers to come and share this information, because sometimes it could be somebody else who may decide just to use it for bad and not report it to you. So that's not part of the program. But if you don't have this, then the rest of the program is going to be on shaky ground. Next is on the communication strategy, and this is something which is very important, and based on our experience, we have seen a lot of times things not working in the way it should be. So one thing is responding to researchers immediately is very important. I have seen cases, not just one or two cases, in many cases, we have seen that some researchers went and revealed the information to the company did not respond, and the researcher went and just shared it publicly, which you don't want. I mean, in our organization, we have an internal policy to make sure that no researcher does that. But then in some cases, somebody may do it, and that's not a good thing for your brand. So responding to researcher is very important. If you may sometimes know of that vulnerability, it might be known to your team, you may not have been able to fix it, or you are just about to fix it. If somebody at that time sends you this information, it is very important to be nice and thank them for that. And of course, if it is genuine and it's a big risk, you should thank them. But even if it is not, even if it is a false positive, it's very important that you just thank them for coming up to you and sharing it. If you want, you can give some bounty if you have that as a program, you giving free t-shirts, etc., etc. You may do a few of those gestures, but a nice thank you is, I believe, very, very important. And I have seen a lot of cases. There had been people on the other side, the engineering team, etc., where people are very defensive, where sometimes they are arrogant with researchers, and many a times the hackers, they are not the best when it comes to developing their communication skills. They're rather honing their hacking skills and not their communication skills. So I have seen cases where people got into arguments and fights, and even in certain cases, it went to the court and litigations. So it's a good idea to have level-headed people over there who can handle the hackers in the right way. And we have seen cases where people being defensive in the sense the data exposed is related to them, but it has happened because of one of their third party, or their customer has exposed it themselves. It is through their product because of some misconfiguration, but it is the customer's fault. Now we have seen people where they just respond, no, that's not, we are not liable to that, or we are not responsible because it is done by somebody else. But it's your brand. It's very important that you take care of your brand, even if the breach or the disclosure is disclosure of data is or exposure of data, the right word, is happening through a third party or your customer themselves. So being defensive, being arrogant is something which the specific person who coordinates should not do. That person should know how to be more of a community person, create that right environment, because we have enough enemies already. We don't want to make one more enemy who came to share your vulnerability for your good. So whatever be the context, having level-headed persons to coordinate is very, very important. And I have seen at least like 20% of the cases people don't handle it right, maybe more, 30%. And then another aspect is, if the research organization wants to make a public release, then try to do it jointly, work with them in terms of controlling the date on which you want to release. How do you make sure that your customers get the message beforehand so that they feel safe? Tell them that everything is fixed, it's taken care of, and then the release happens. Sometimes I have seen some organizations doing this release without coordinating with the particular organization where they found out such risks. So it's a good idea that you work with them and control in such a way, in a positive way, so that it is both right and fair and also good for your business. And also building an internal communication. This is very important. I mean, your board members or investors should not know it through a press, through the press or through some news. So it should be communicated beforehand, including your customers. So communication is a very important part of this entire strategy, apart from fixing. And having the right person and right process will take you a long way. So that's at a high level. And we went through, in summary, what all could be discovered publicly. We went through these standards and frameworks. We went through these examples. We went through how to build a program and also how to have that right communication strategy. So that's at a broad level how you can jumpstart and get started and we'll share with you this presentation with all the links so that you can download all these frameworks or sample documents and create your own. So if you have any questions, you can type them in the question section and we will try to answer. So we'll give you a few minutes.
I can see a few questions on the right hand side of your control panel. There's a questions tab under which you have to enter your questions, and we'll be able to see it and take it one after the other.
Okay, I can see a question on how to prevent illegal hacking so that you don't want your company to be hacked or some disruption being caused. So basically you can't prevent that, but as a part of the policy, you can create this as an exclusions. And I have shown some examples of what other organizations have done in terms of excluding what kind of attacks or research is not permitted. And of course, anything which is not legal is not legal, though people generally are open to getting information which is shared in private for good. But you can, the broad story is that you can put those exclusions on your website. And I can see another question on some of the researchers who has recently been sued by some companies. Does this happen, and what are the implications? So yes, it has happened. It's very rare, and for example, there had been some cases where an organization's security related information or some research, somebody shared some research from an organization, the organization did not want the researcher to share, and that person got fired because of that. And then because of that reason, the rest of the people from their team left the organization. So this happened in Black Hat, I think 1 or 2 years ago, or two years back. So if you want to take a drastic measure like that, if there's the researcher from your organization, you have to be very careful so that it doesn't create a negative impact in your company. If suppose there are cases where some researchers got sued by some company, and some pending such cases are there. However, these days there are a lot of regulations which are inviting such research and kind of safeguarding ethical hackers from disclosing those vulnerabilities which are related to public safety. So USA, I don't remember the exact one, but USA recently passed some regulation like that. So my high-level view would be that it's very rare. I hear some concerns from some researchers not sharing the details because of this, but in general, most of the mature organizations are very open and inviting, and they treat such disclosures in a very good manner. And in fact, they also have this bug bounties, etc. So overall, that's very rare. So I can't see any other questions. So thank you. Thanks, all of you.
Vikas, I can see a few more questions.
Okay,
there's
please.
a question by Prakash Kumar. He wants to know that at a bank, is a bug bounty a good idea, since it might have media involvement and it might increase chaos. So he wants to know on that.
Okay, that's a great question. So there could be various viewpoints on this, and these are strategies where you can have multiple perspective. I will tell you my perspective. If you are a large bank, so if you are a large bank and you are very mature, I believe that it is a great idea to have a bug bounty program. But you should be mature enough that you invite the world to come and hack you. But if you don't have that confidence, then better you first build those practice, have a good VAPT program and all attack surface discovery program, and then you do that. Now, from the media perspective, I believe it's a much safer thing where somebody comes and discloses the vulnerability to you as a bank, you then fix it and give that guy a free t-shirt, rather than that gets disclosed to the banking regulators like RBI or whichever country you are from, and then you run after um, the regulator for 6 months, or even worst case that you don't get to know but hackers disclose it in the media, and again you have a much bigger impact. This time you don't just face the regulator but also the media, and also you face the management and the board members. So it's a good idea in terms of risk management that you have a bug bounty and invite hackers to share those details with you and give them some goodies. But if you are not mature enough right now, you don't have this regular VAPT, which is really in depth and intense, not just doing this check in the box. And if you have proper monitoring mechanisms in terms of discovering your attack surface, etc. If you don't have it yet, then get that thing in place and then do it. Pritha, can you see any other questions?
Yes, Seema Mangira has a question. Is the VDP only for the application service providers, or any service industry can do so?
Anybody can do that, but the first ones to adopt VDP had been the product companies and the organizations whose products and services are used by a lot of people. So that's how it kind of got started, but it could be for anybody. So it does not matter what kind of business you are in, you can always have a VDP, because if you have an online attack surface, it's a good idea to have a vulnerability disclosure program.
Okay, Seema, I hope your question was answered. I can also unmute you each by each so that you can have a, you have further questions based on whatever the speaker is addressing. You can go ahead and answer. Seema, was your question answered? I've unmuted you.
Yes, Preeta.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you. I also
Thank
have
you.
one more question. If a VDP is violated, what action do you initiate?
It is a great question. So there are instances where people took legal actions. Now, there is definitely an option of taking legal action. But taking legal action is something which is a matter of delicacy. You probably want to have that as an option. So having a VDP and having the exclusions is very important part from the legal perspective. But will you always exercise that? The answer is no. Most of the people don't exercise if they see non-malicious intent. If suppose somebody does something which is outside of the VDP, but that person did it truly with honest intent and came and disclosed the details to you and helped to fix that, then most of the times organizations don't take any negative steps. And I remember one story, I think it's in Facebook. One of the internal team members, not like a external vulnerability disclosure, one of the internal team members did some testing and brought down Facebook. So Facebook was actually down because of that. So Mark actually came and thanked this guy, and instead of taking any like action against him, actually thanked him. So so it depends on the context. I believe it's a good idea to have that option where you can take legal action, but generally it's not taken because of multiple reasons. You don't want to be looked at as an organization who is unfriendly to hackers.
Okay, thank you, Vikash.
Thank you, Seema. Because there's
Thanks,
a
Priya.
thank you. There's another question from Prakash. This is again regarding the bank. So he says, do you recommend to publicize the breach even if we don't have the compulsion from the regulator?
No, we don't. I think it's a good idea to keep your breaches as much under the cover as possible. Mm. But it is very important that you have to do it for the regulator, because it's now mandatory and compulsory that you have to do it. But it's not necessary you have to make it public always. But then there are some kind of breaches for which it is very important that you inform the people who are affected. So you need to make a decision which is case by case. If there are affected people, you may send those affected people direct emails only to them, but it's not necessary to make a public press release for that. Now, if there's an organization who wants to make a public press release, who is disclosing that and works with you, coordinates with you on that, you can make a public release where you use this in a way which is empowering for your bank, where you say that at our bank we take security very seriously. We have these measures to make sure we are secure, but nobody can ensure 100% security. So we also encourage security researchers to coordinate with us across the globe to help us make more secure. And we are thankful that this researcher has found out an issue and helped us to fix it. So here what happens is you take this opportunity to boost your brand rather than show it in a negative way. So if the research organization wants to make it public regarding their discovery, because a lot of time researchers big gain out of it is not the money but the recognition. They want that recognition. So in that case, do it in a way so that it also boosts your brand and does not affect you negatively.
Great.
Pritha, any other
Uh,
question?
yes, there are a lot more. I'll just select a few and tell you. Padma Priya wants to know, will conducting VAPT for in-house applications help eliminating hackers?
So conducting VAPT for internal applications which are not exposed is also very, very important, because a hacker might conduct a social engineering attack, break into one of the users' accounts, and then break into the user system, and from there pivot and get access to this application, and then breach this application. So even if your the application is internal, it is very important that you need to do VAPT. But will VAPT be enough to secure your application? The answer is no. I mean, it can't be enough. Whatever you do, it does not matter whichever best technology you take and conduct such testing. None of the technologies can find out all the flaws. And there are also many new classes of vulnerabilities which are yet to be discovered. So you can never find 100%. So this is a battle which you need to fight continuously. So having this continuous vulnerability management program is very important. Though that does not guarantee that you will always be secure, it is something which is a must. And then once you secure it, then you also need certain other things. Like if you look at NIST CSF, I very much like the philosophy of NIST CSF. So NIST talks about like you should identify the vulnerabilities, assets, and all these things. So identify is one where you find out the vulnerability for your application. Then comes how do you protect it, having the WAF or RASP and things like that. So you should have protection. Then how do you detect an attacker who has already breached into? So having certain mechanisms like having the SOC, etc., to monitor and see whether your or even RASP to monitor whether your application is being breached or there's an attack. Um, so that's the detection piece. And after doing all of this, you have to assume that you can get compromised. And then comes the response part. So if you get compromised, how do you respond to it? How quickly can you recover from it? So response and recovery is also a very important part of it. So building the security from the perspective of a programmatic view where you have identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover is very important. So yes, it's a must. You should do continuous vulnerability assessment, but that's not enough. You need to look into all the 5 capabilities.